sure his schedule, but because this is being broadcast, live streamed, we're going to ask you to ask the questions through the microphone. So Richard will be bringing it around so that people watching at home can hear the question as well as the answer, okay? Thanks.
I'm surprised that you're still here. Welcome back, folks. I'm going to do something I usually don't do. Forget about the presentation, okay? We don't need that. It's there, but I'm not going to use it much. Let me try to summarize, all right, very kind of quickly and briefly, what are the main issues that Israel is facing. And I don't want to even touch the issue of COVID because it's so similar to what happens here in America, all right? In both cases, we speak about open societies, we speak about lots of controversy, we speak about not trusting the government. It's the same thing in America as it is in Israel. And therefore, there's not much thing I can tell you about Israel that will sound totally bizarre. Many people are vaccinated. We still have the mask regulation. Many people resist that. It looks like the rate of infection is slowly decreasing. Many people speak about maybe the end of the pandemic. And I think that it's very hard now to analyze what happened. I mean, what happened was such a big shock to everybody. We need to have some perspective, which we don't have right now. And therefore, we can speak about day-to-day life and how the country responded and people. But again, it's not unique to Israel. I think that you see a lot of similarities to what happened to America as well. And when I came here for the first time during COVID, it was in last June, and I was curious to see exactly how America behaves in COVID days, are very similar to what happened in Israel. Confusion in the schools and the clinics and hospitals, and everybody's overwhelmed. Nobody trusts nobody, too much information. You don't know what's right and what's wrong. Regulation change every day. You have the CDC, we have something equivalent. People are just sick and tired because you don't know what to trust. And information is so contradicting, conflicting. Try to get on the plane, as I did, all right? When it's not clear what documents you need. I'm telling you, they sent me back home shamefully twice. I couldn't get on the plane because I had the wrong documents after trying to find out what to do, and here, total chaos. The question is, what are we learning? Because it's not the last time we see something like that. I mean, it's going to happen again. And the question is, did we learn anything, and how governments are going to respond if they lost the trust of the people? And one of the things that happened, that people just don't trust what they hear in the media anymore. And without the trust of the people, governments have a hard time to operate. And therefore, when it comes to COVID, which catches everybody's attention, I think that I have nothing to tell you that you are not already familiar with, right? Very similar to what happens. Israel made a deal with Pfizer, and Pfizer are using us basically like guinea pigs in a way. But we had priority in getting the vaccines. Everybody was praising Prime Minister Netanyahu because he's a good friend with the CEO, Albert Bourla, a Jewish man, and he was using his influence and his gravity as a world-renowned politician, and we had priority. Everybody was cheering and hailing. Well, I'm afraid to say that nonsense. Pfizer was using the whole state of Israel basically as a lab. We surrendered our medical data, all right? Pfizer has the right to have access to medical data, not individually, not by name. But everything that Israel does with COVID, Pfizer has access, all right, to the data, the information, and they're going to use us basically as an example how to develop more vaccines in the future, because we are a classical capsule, so to speak. One airport goes in and out of the country, surrounded by countries that we don't even have access to, and therefore they use us as an example. So vaccination in Israel, about 70% of the population is vaccinated, including booster. Including myself, although I had COVID twice. So right now the score is COVID-2, me 0. Somehow I'll try to I don't know what to do regarding that. Really minor symptoms, and it just went without any problems, but officially I had COVID. Great experience. Anyhow, again, so when we speak about that, I'm afraid that I have nothing to tell you that will sound totally bizarre, maybe except for one thing, but you'll find it in America as well. The demographics in Israel, that will be one challenge that we are facing, and that will sound a little unbelievable to you, but we can lose our country without anybody firing a single bullet at Israel. We can lose our country because of the demographics of the state of Israel. I mentioned to you earlier, speaking about the city of Jerusalem, and we can kind of magnify that to speak about the whole country. Population in Israel today, about 9 million people. 75% will be Jewish, 25% will be Arabs, plus some minorities. Problem is that the Jewish population is not growing as fast as the Arab population. And Israel's population today includes about close to 2 million Jews that came from Russia over the last 20 years or so. If these Jews had not come to Israel, then today the population would not be 75-25, be closer to 65-35. And if you add to that the ultra-Orthodox, you're very close to be in a situation that the right of Israel to exist, as we want it to see, as a secular democracy, will be questionable, because we may come to a point in Israel, there will be a majority of people that will question Israel's legitimacy. And that can be devastating in a democracy. Because if you have the ultra-Orthodox, right, plus the growing Arab population, and not enough Jews are coming into the country, it may change the whole situation. Now, since we are a democracy, in our nightmares, we can see a situation in which the parliament has a majority of people that don't want the state of Israel. In the present form, you simply vote for it. And that will be the end of it. And it sounds like impossible, but this is something that bothers us a lot, is how to keep our demographics. Israel must have an overwhelming Jewish majority, otherwise we may lose the country. And the question is, how do you do that? And you want to keep democratic principles. You do understand the conflict here. And in order to try to change that and be in such a situation, Israel made some rules and regulations, and I would like to share some with, because it is indeed a real threat on our existence. There's no separation of state and religion in Israel, which means that everything in Israel is done by rabbinical code, including marriages, divorces, inheritance, etc. So there are two systems of law. One is the state law, and one is the rabbinical law. And there was another system, which is the Muslim Sharia law. Did you know that Muslims are practicing Sharia law in Israel? You cannot do that in America. And who is accused to be brutal, aggressive, prejudice, etc.? Israel. The Arabs in Israel, the Muslims, can practice Sharia law. The state respects it. Not capital offenses, but money issues, family issues, they can do them, all right? And therefore, we have three systems which are working in a way parallel to each other: the general system, the rabbinical system, and the Sharia system, all right? And according to the rabbinical system, definition of Jewish is, if your mother was Jewish, you are considered to be Jewish for the sake of citizenship in Israel. In order to come to Israel today and be a citizen, you have to prove that you are the son or daughter of a Jewish mother. Not the father, but the mother. And there's a way to do that, by presenting documents, etc. Now, by the way, we are a religion right now in our time in history that discourages people to convert to Judaism. There used to be a time that the Jews wanted to grow and to take in lots of people, not anymore. It has historical reasons. But today, in order to become Jewish, it's a very long and humiliating process. If you go to a rabbi and you ask him to convert you, he'll ask you a question. Why? You have to consider the answer very carefully. If you tell him, I fell in love with a Jewish girl and she won't marry me unless I'm converting, he won't start the process. You gave him the wrong answer. The answer should be, I'm giving you a tip, if in case you want to. Should be because of the love of God and the love of his people. That the rabbi is going to warn you that you are going to suffer for your decision. Do you still want to become Jewish? That's the whole procedure. Some rabbis will do that much easier, much lighter. You go to Reformed rabbis, for example, in America. And therefore, how to become Jewish is a key issue. Because the state of Israel will only take people in that can prove that they are Jews. Problem is, not enough people came. And since not enough people came, the state got involved in rabbinical procedures and said the following: if your mother was not Jewish, but your grandmother was, you are good enough to be a citizen. Which means there are two categories of the definition Jewish. One is for the sake of citizenship, one is the rabbinical one. Which means that since there's no separation of state and religion, and people may come in who are Jews enough for the state, but not Jews enough for the rabbis, they cannot get married in Israel. Because no rabbi will marry them. They are not Jewish enough by rabbinical code. So the state got involved once again. And whenever the state gets involved, it's chaos. And they said the following: if you are married outside the borders of Israel, we respect your marriage for the sake of the civil law. So many people will get on a plane and will go to the closest country to Israel to get married, which is Cyprus, by the way. They can go to Vegas as well, but they go to Cyprus. And the way that the state sees it, they are married. But not for the rabbis, which means if they're going to have children, the rabbis will not recognize them as legit. And they will not marry them in 25, 30 years. So the situation is getting worse and worse and worse. And all of that manipulation because of one reason, to live in a situation that the Jews have a majority in the country, because without that, Israel will cease to exist, as we want to see that, the home for the Jewish people. So demographics will be challenge number one for the state of Israel, not nuclear weapons, and not Palestinians, and not Syrians, demographics. I know it sounds a little amazing, because who would think about that? Well, that will be the main problem that we are dealing with. The other existential issue is very clearly on the table for many years now, and that will be the existence of, not existence, but Iran. And we take it very seriously. You need to understand it. We are not in a position to take it lightly because they mean business and they have a very well-organized plan, and we see it happens every day, etc. What catches the world attention is a nuclear deal. Everybody speaks about Vienna and how the negotiations are taking time and how close are the Iranians to enrich uranium, and another 2 months they'll have the bomb, another 5 months they'll have the... Let me tell you a secret, okay? The Iranians will have nuclear weapons, okay, period. Too late to stop them. And don't buy what you hear from world leaders. We will not let... The Iranians will have nuclear weapons if they want to. They can choose not to have them. But please define a weapon. What is exactly a weapon? Well, in order to have a nuclear weapon, you have to have a ballistic missile with a nuclear warhead. What about having these two, but they are not installed one on top of the other? Do you have the weapon, yes or no? Do you understand my point? You stored the missile in one case, and you stored the warhead in another arsenal. Do you have the weapon, yes or no? When those two components will become a weapon? You understand what I mean, right? You need to put one on top of the other and have the will, the motivation. Iran, if they want to, will have nuclear weapons, too late to stop them. Which leaves the question of who is protected from the weapon and not who has the weapon. And once Iran will have it, Saudi Arabia will have it, and Egypt will have it, it will start a crazy race. Now, according to foreign sources, Israel has nuclear weapons. We never officially admitted that, but let's say for the sake of argument that we do. We also have a weapon system which is called the Arrow, and the Arrow is a system, it's made of fuel, the Iron Dome, the Arrow, the David Sling, etc. Basically, it's protecting the skies, all right? And the Arrow can intercept ballistic missiles in the outer space, okay? That will, and they promise 99% of success. The problem is the 1% they don't promise. Now, let me ask you a question, which is a question of philosophy, not a question of warfare. Let's say that Iran came to the conclusion that this is the right time to fire a nuclear weapon at Israel. And let's say that they did. And our system intercepted the nuclear weapon of the Iranians, no damage was done. Do we have the right to retaliate by using our nuclear weapons, knowing that Iran is not protected and hundreds of thousands will die? What say you? Well, the point is that there's come a moment that you have to deal with bigger issues, what is bigger than warfare, issues of philosophy. And this is something that may happen. Because what happens now vis-a-vis Gaza, for example, all right? The Palestinians are firing rockets. The Iron Dome intercepts 94% of the rockets. And then the world says, so how come you retaliate against Gaza? Nothing happened. Just a minute now. These guys are investing everything they have, not to buy food for the people, but to develop weapons to kill Israelis. We are intercepting the weapons. Don't we have the right to take it a step further and take out their facilities? No, no, no. No damage was done, so why are you retaliating? You have this excellent weapon system. You're not losing any people. Don't retaliate. Just let them keep bombing you because no damage was done. Which means that Israel is becoming more defensive in mindset than ever before. It buys time. It buys time because nobody's under pressure to retaliate, to shoot from the hip, as they say in your country, because, hey, no damage was done. So you understand the dilemma. Are we going to invest in defense because defense doesn't win wars? Are we going to invest in offense? I know it sounds strange, but the best thing that ever happened to the Palestinians is the Iron Dome. If we did not have the Iron Dome and Israelis were killed by Palestinian rockets, we'll wipe Gaza out without any hesitation. They should thank us for developing the Iron Dome. I know it sounds bizarre, but that's a mindset. But the Israeli mindset is changing. It used to be very offensive, quite aggressive, not anymore because we have the technology. We are superior, so why retaliate? And that may trickle down to the ranks of the army because if you don't have that approach of let's go and get them because you know how to do that, that may change the whole mindset. So having technology is excellent, but it also puts you in a position of more defensive than offensive, and this is new. This is new because we never thought like that, and I don't have any inside information. My position was minor, I was not among decision makers, and Prime Minister never called me to ask for my opinion, okay? So I'm just giving you some ideas that, we just talk, and we try to figure out what's going on. So because if you are more defensive, and you lose the will to attack, if you wish, that may change the whole way that we see warfare in the future. And you listen to the Israeli media, which is really sometimes mind-blowing. They always speak about, if we will retaliate, Israeli soldiers will be killed. Yeah, I'm sorry, that's what war is all about. And suddenly you come to the conclusion that if a civilian is getting killed, well, he's a casualty of war. But if a soldier is killed, that's our kid. He's everybody's son. We send him to the army and we go. For me, it's new. I can understand that mindset. Nobody wants to send their kids to the army. But it was not the way that Israelis used to think or to talk. Something in the media, I would say the liberal media, okay? I know that you like the term. Something in the mindset, all right, that we have to be very careful because human lives are more important than anything else. So what do we have an army for? If you hesitate to use the army because the soldiers' lives is more valuable than the nation's safety, who thinks like that? So I'm afraid that unless we are going to learn the lesson and change that kind of mindset, because you can see how it develops. So technology is great, but technology can also develop a certain mindset that focuses more on defense than offense, and I'm afraid that we are going to that direction, trusting technology without doing what needs to be done. My view, nobody shares this view but me. Please do not hold me accountable for sharing. I'm telling you my opinion, all right? You won't hear it in other places, just my opinion. Take it or leave it. I think I'm reflecting a broader sentiment in Israel, especially people that are in my position, maybe my generation, because remember how it used to be. The last time I was called for duty was in 2006. The whole regiment was mobilized, and we were waiting on our vehicles on the Lebanese border. Lebanon, huh? Another Lebanon, huh? Lebanese border to go inside to take out Hezbollah. 30,000 reservists were called, and we waited, and we waited, and we waited, and the government hesitated and hesitated. Finally, we did not go in. All right? And again, that was a weak point. It was a weak point because if you have the army and you don't have the will, so what are we doing exactly? All right? Just to share some thoughts with you, and I'm sorry for kind of drifting away, that was not my point. So I would say that these are the two main challenges that speak about existential challenges of the State of Israel, is to keep a certain demographical structure, and of course to make sure that Iran doesn't get closer to our borders, because Iran is operating on two different levels. Number one, nuclear, that's what takes the world's attention. Number two, happens on the ground every day to build militias and have proxies to get as closer as possible geographically to Israel borders. Hezbollah in Lebanon is the strongest supporter of Iran. Iran has a land bridge through Syria to supply Hezbollah with everything that they need. Iran is basically building militias on Syrian soil, dressed in Syrian uniforms, equipped with Syrian weapons, but they are answering to Iran. They have proxies on the Golan Heights as well area. Again, it sounds like something terrible is going to happen. Let me put it this way. Not only that life goes on, Israel is prosperous. Israel is really richer than all the other countries in the area. Israel is beautiful and quiet. I know it's hard to believe, but we are. And this is something that we have to plan for the future. Because when you hear the description, you may think to yourself, it's a dangerous place to live in. No, it's not. It's beautiful, it's safe, and nothing happens, basically. When people told me, we are very scared to go because of the violence. And I say, please, name one. What violence? The last time that a bomb exploded in Jerusalem was in 2003. It was bad, but that was 20 years ago. But that memory still sticks in people. People tell me the Golan Heights are dangerous. Nothing happens on the Golan Heights since 1974. Nothing. Happens in Syria, not in Israel. The only hot spot is Gaza. That's it. And it happens every few years. There is a round of violence. I don't have any other ways to tell you, but some of you have been there. Did you feel uncomfortable? Did you feel in danger? Did you feel threatened to run to the bomb shelter because of? No, because it doesn't happen. What kind of a news bulletin will start by saying, good evening, it was a quiet day in Jerusalem today? It just doesn't work like that. So whenever something happens, it's magnified in the world media because it's Jerusalem. And it creates the impression that Jerusalem equals danger and equals violence. It's not the case. And if you don't trust me, come and see for yourselves. How about that, huh? Okay, I think that I was able just to convey 2 or 3 some thoughts about what bothers the nation today. The other things are the usual, economy, society, but we speak about these 2 pivotal points, if you wish, which are really, really something that we have to consider and navigate very carefully, how to be successful in both, because we can't lose these 2. We cannot lose our demographics, and we have to make sure that Iran is not getting too close to our borders. By the way, it's not just an Israeli-Iranian issue. The first target of Iran are the Sunni Arab countries. Iran is Shiite. I don't want to go there. Just to say the following, okay? Iran are Muslims, Shiites, not Arabs. All right? The big adversary are the Turks. Turks, Sunnis, not Arabs. Which means the 2 big Muslim powers that fight to dominate the Muslim world, one is Shiite, one is a Sunni, both not Arabs. All right? The Iranians are Farsis, not Arabs. The Turks are Turks, not Arabs. And this is humiliating for the Arab nations, that the fight over leading Islam is not the Arab nations involved, but Muslim nations who are not Arabs, the Farsis and the Turks. And what we see basically is struggle between the 2. It's not an open war yet, but it will be. And where? On Syria's soil. Okay? All right. Questions? That's an optimistic message, Pastor. Thank you for... How are we going to do that? Okay, please.
Sure. It does seem to be a pattern that the Arab nations, or even North African nations, seem to have an interest in making alliances with Israel, beginning with the Trump administration, and perhaps just asking your opinion between Iran and Turkey. With that pressure, maybe it's moving more of the Arabs to make alliances with Israel.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And we see that happening. Yesterday, we signed an agreement with Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates and the Abraham Accords, and Morocco and Sudan, many others. Arab nations begin to understand that Iran is a threat more to them than to us, and they cannot face Iran by themselves. They have to have us on their side. Egypt and Jordan and Saudi Arabia and the Arab Emirates, Iran is a threat to the whole region, not just to Israel. And therefore they understand that they're going to be the first target, being Sunni Muslims and Arabs and not Shiites, and they need a powerful ally. We are the powerful ally. By the way, watch Yemen. Yemen is getting the strongest proxy of Iran right now. The Houthis in Yemen are going to present a real threat. To the Red Sea, ISIS is still there, alive and kicking, in the Sinai Peninsula. They can control the Suez Canal. That's going to change world history if somebody is going to threaten the shipping that goes through the Suez Canal. And they can do that easily. That's sovereign Egyptian territory. The Egyptians are not strong enough to protect their own territory. So they need us for that as well. They won't say it loud and clear, but I will. The Arab countries cannot make it without Israel to stand and confront Iran. And of course the US. America is also involved. Indirectly, but involved. Other questions? Thank you, sir, for doing this.
I recall the numbers about 60% of the population being Jewish and 40% Arab, and then you said 50% of the Jewish population being ultra-Orthodox.
In Jerusalem.
That paints a homogeneous picture. I'm interested in you to tell us what the other 50% looks like.
Oh, the other 50%? We can divide them to a few groups as well, but let's just call them in a general name. We call them secular Jews. Now, it's not a good term, because I will be categorized as a secular Jew under these conditions. When somebody says that he's a secular, it means that he's not living by rabbinical code. That's what it means. So the title secular is given to people like myself by my ultra-Orthodox brothers. Since I refuse to listen to the rabbis, and they're right. I know how to read my Bible. I don't need a rabbi to make commentaries for me. And since I question their authority, I'll be secular. And that will describe still the majority of Jews in Israel. Still a majority, okay? Losing it because the families grow really fast. You try to practice social distancing during COVID days in a house with 2 bedrooms and 15 children. Well, I'm exaggerating, but 6, 7, yeah. So that would be the ultra-Orthodox situation. Okay, so I guess the term secular, because Israel by definition is a secular, national, Jewish democracy. Okay?
So what is your comment on what just happened with United States releasing or blessing, was it Iran with the funds?
I'm sorry. I'm here for 2 weeks, so I'm not really catching up with the news. What happened?
We heard that the United States lifted sanctions against the Iranian nuclear program. Just happened. Have you heard that?
What can I say? Well, again, the question is, some people say that the whole leaving the nuclear deal in Trump's days was a mistake, because at least under the deal there was some kind of supervision. People could at least go and see what the Iranians are planning. But even then, listen, the Iranians are masters in negotiating. It's a Persian bazaar. They can give everybody lessons how to exhaust the enemy or the adversary. But we need to understand the mindset as well. This is the Muslim mindset. I'm not being anti-Muslim here. I'm not a theologian. But we need to understand that, all right? Only the weak party is willing to negotiate. If you're strong, you don't negotiate. You go and get it. And if you're willing to negotiate, that means that we are winning. Why stop now? So when the West is offering negotiations vis-a-vis Iran, that's the mindset. Only the weak party is willing to talk. Now, we come from a different mindset as the Western civilization. We think that by reasoning, I'll give up some, you give up some, we'll find a way to solve a problem. It's not the mindset of the other side. Only the weak party is willing to make concessions. If you're strong, why make concessions? Go and get it. Now, with this mindset, you come to the negotiation table when the American president said loud and clear, the military option is off the table. So what kind of leverage you have against Iran if you say loud and clear, no military option? And then you take it back. It looks like we do not understand something in the way to negotiate vis-a-vis Iran. So, again, it's only things that were published and we all know. Again, I don't have any inside information, so just making an observation. Any other questions? Oh, come on, Temple Mount, Palestinians. I can ask the questions and try to answer. No, seriously, folks, and anything that please, by all means.
What you talked about as far as the Holocaust survivors is heartbreaking thought of their perspective of themselves. And I'm trying to understand, was it an internalized perspective from your understanding of a survivor's guilt kind of thing, or actual humans, and who were those actual humans who gave them that perspective of themselves?
I'm not sure how to answer that, but in 1960, the Israeli Mossad, which is the equivalent of the CIA, arrested in Argentina Adolf Eichmann. And Eichmann was the mastermind behind the final solution, right, about sending the Jews, especially from Hungary, to the death camps. Able to find him, they abducted him from Argentina and brought him to Israel, and it was a trial. The only time that somebody was basically executed by Israel was Adolf Eichmann. We don't have capital punishment. We made the exception especially for him, and that was such a high-profile trial that suddenly things that nobody spoke about were everywhere. It covered the news media. Everybody started to speak about the Holocaust. But until 1960, it was something that nobody was mentioning. It was off the table. We were simply too ashamed. We are a proud nation. We're going to build a home, and these cowards from Europe come to this country. They're going to make us weaker. Why do we need them here? That was the approach of my generation vis-a-vis mom and dad, okay? So, you do understand that how can such an open wound can last for a long time. Again, it's healing, and people begin to understand now what these people suffered and went through, but for a while, that was the approach. So the Eichmann trial was maybe the turning point, to put it on the table and deal with it, because hiding it wasn't good for anybody. Other questions, please?
What does Israel think about Joe Biden? Our president. I don't personally care for him.
Go, Brandon. I don't even know what I just said, okay, so please. I know that you complain against your liberal media, and we have the same problem in Israel. And I think that it's not what Israel thinks, because I cannot really think about who thinks for Israel. I can tell you that the government is definitely, regardless who is the president, all right? We believe that the Israeli-American relationship is beyond issues of personalities, and regardless who is the president, presidents come and go. As long as we share the same values, we know that we will be supported by the US of A. To what an extent, it's hard to tell. For how long, it's hard to tell. But we try to focus on the principles and not on the individual. And therefore, America is America, regardless who is the president. When it comes to the media, and most of the media people in Israel are indeed very liberal, they portray, to some extent, the Trump administration in a very negative way, and the Biden administration in a more positive way. But it was the same situation vis-a-vis our own Prime Minister, Netanyahu. All right, everybody made this similarity, how Trump and Netanyahu have the same kind of policy, even the same personal behavior in a way. And since the media in Israel, I'm looking for an understatement, didn't like Mr. Netanyahu, right? It reflected also on the way that they treated the American administration. So on a principle, regardless of recognizing Jerusalem as capital, regardless of recognizing the Golan Heights as part of the state of Israel, Israeli media was not in favor of the Trump administration or the Netanyahu one. So when it comes to the Democrats or Republicans, again, this is just my personal opinion, because I cannot speak about what Israel thinks. That would be a little hard to do. But we believe that the issues are not personal issues. Presidents come and go, prime ministers come and go, and as long as we share the same, let's call them Judeo-Christian values, all right? We know that the two societies will be together supporting one another, and it will be very hard for Israel to really exist without knowing that we have a big, strong ally like the US of A. And that goes to every level, and I do believe personally, and I do not know the nuances enough, right, about Democrats, Republicans, I'll leave that to you. But I do believe that the support of Israel is bipartisan. And you hear that from many Democrats and Republicans as well. And as long as this is the case, we are content. That's the way it should be. Every now and then you have some reasons for concern. For example, to approve the budget for the Iron Dome, a defensive weapon system that the Senate had some hesitation. The Democrats refused to support the budget for that, and to find another way to do that. So I will say that presidents come and go, and as long as the two countries are sharing the same values, I guess we can trust on the U.S.'s support. I'm trying to be a diplomat here. Vote for me.
Okay, you spoke about, I can't remember the change of how the population change, and we get information from International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, and I want to know, does that make any difference, and how do the Israeli people feel about? I understand they're coming from many different countries, and many of them are Jews, I assume, but how is that affecting many coming into your country from
I apologize,
countries?
but I'm not sure that I followed. What the question is about our demographics, so people that come in the country.
Demographics.
People coming to the
country. Is that
country.
having any effect at all? I don't know if they're ultra-Orthodox, or whether they come with political things in mind, but do people even notice all the newcomers coming in? And maybe there aren't that many.
Well, once again, I have to apologize. I'm not.
Okay.
Maybe I'm too tired to follow. No, seriously,
But
it's also a possibility.
and some of their information talks about people, Jews making
Aliyah.
aliyah,
Uh-huh.
and they come from many different countries.
Yes.
I'm sorry. And surely they must, I mean, you must be aware, the country must be aware of them coming in, because that's so many different nationalities coming in. I just wondered if that had any kind of effect or...
Well, I know that you call yourself a melting pot, and we are a melting pot indeed. As long as you're Jewish, you're welcome to come. And maybe the best example are the Ethiopian Jews. We have in Israel about 100,000 Jews from Ethiopia, and they're, black African Jews. They came from Ethiopia, and they're part of our society. And there was a question about, are they really Jewish? And many rabbis refused to accept the Jewishness, if there is such a word, because they were cut off basically from the rabbinical Jewish world. I would say that being cut off is a benefit, because you were not, forgive me, contaminated by rabbinical commentary. You go back to the source. So Ethiopian Jews will be more Jews in the practice than rabbinical Jews today. But since the power in the state is in the hands of the rabbis, there's some questions about how Jewish are the Jews from Ethiopia. All right, so that's a good example, but we have Jews that come from every country in the world. As long as your mother was Jewish, by the law of return, you're most welcome to come in. And of course your spouse as well. That will give right for your spouse to come as well. All right, and yes, you have people from every country in the world, which really makes society very rich, because they bring their cuisine with them, so the food is excellent. And they bring a certain culture. We definitely have people, I guess, from every country in the world, because that was the Jewish diaspora, scattered around among the nations, and now it's time to come home. So from Russia to South Africa to Morocco to China to Japan, everywhere. In 1973, Menachem Begin, 1979, Menachem Begin was prime minister, and he even invited 200 Vietnamese refugees to come and live in Israel, right, without conversion. So many of them did convert, because it really gives you, so we have even Vietnamese Jews. We have people, we are everywhere. We are controlling the media. We control the world. We are everywhere. Yeah. Yeah. We have Jews from every country. About the healthcare system.
Yeah, if you could just tell us a little something about the healthcare system.
Yes, I can. Although what happens these days is not a good example, all right? These days, due to the COVID pressure, it looks like there are a lot of malfunctions. But you need to know that Israel was founded on socialist principles, all right? I know that in America, socialism is a bad word, so I'll hesitate to use that, although I will argue that not everybody fully understands the term socialism, confused with communism, not the same, by the way. But the founding fathers of the state came from socialist countries, and that's how we started. So socialized medicine was always there from day one. And they take from your paycheck about 5% that covers everything that you need, including dental care until the age of 18. Lots of good doctors in the country. We offer medical care to Arab countries as well. So we have a lot of people that come to seek medical attention in Israel. They do that incognito, because it won't be taken well in their own countries to know that the leader of Hamas sent his wife for brain surgery in Israel. That will not be well taken by Hamas in Gaza, but that's what happens basically. There's always a shortage of resources, always. But again, all things considered, the number of doctors per capita is quite high. A lot of Jews that came from Russia had to train on Western medicine, but they brought a lot of new blood, so to speak, to the system. And we don't have enough hospitals maybe, but again, all things considered, the system is working, and it's working well. So medical attention is one of the best in the world, I have to say. No. Everybody has basic insurance. The question was about wait list for operations. You can buy some extra insurance, and most people do, but the basics are basics. So if you buy extra insurance, you can decide who will be the surgeon, what will be the hospital, and when you want to have your surgery. So again, this is when capitalism kind of kicked in to try to, but so you do have choices. In some cases, insurance will send you abroad. If we don't have specialists in Israel to do something, then your insurance will cover surgeries around the world as well, the basic one, not something. So when we speak about the healthcare system, it's fair, and everybody's covered. And it costs about 5% from our paycheck that will cover everything that basically we need. Life expectancy in Israel, 83 years for women and 81 for men. I think the second highest in the world after Japan or something like that. So.
Yes, can you tell us about the processing centers when she was saying that you get the foreigners who come in, the Jews come in, like the Ethiopians that we know. I don't know if you heard of Bridges of Peace. They're usually big in Israel. They have a warehouse and they supply food for Holocaust victims and whatnot. And then we heard about the processing centers. People come in from other countries and they go through a center where they learn your language and I don't know if they help get them jobs. So can you comment on that?
Yeah, well, it depends. If you come to Israel and you have your own resources, and you are well established financially, economically, you have a job, then of course you'll be taken in immediately without any problem. Usually you join the family, and if you have a job that the country needs, that won't be a problem. People that come without any specific skills, they need to study the language. So we have what we call absorption centers, and they will go to an ulpan to study the language. And then when they land at the airport, they get a check. They're very generous in letting people in, a check, which is a loan basically, but gives them a little bit of time to pay the rent for a few months or just get some basics. And that's how we accommodate people. And after 6 months in one of those centers, when they study the language and supposed to be able to find a job, they're supposed to leave and just start their life in the community. But again, there are lots of funds and a lot of assistance that's coming from other, non-profit organizations in the country. So it's not just the government. The whole society looks like they are recruited and mobilized to make sure that the procedure of coming in is a little easier. I'll be quick to admit that it doesn't go without difficulties, all right? There's problems, and I'm afraid that a little racism every now and then that we have as well. I'm afraid that's very common in other countries around the world, but that's the way it works. The problem is that, again, we try to do things that we believe are good for the state and good for the people, but we don't get their cooperation. When you speak about Jews from Russia or Ethiopia, the best will be just to send them to different places around the country, so they will just become part of society, but they prefer to live together, the whole clan together. So you create those neighborhoods of people which will not leave because they don't feel comfortable, and basically they're going to stay in that formation for generations to come. They're not going to marry people from the outside, but when you try to give them a chance and send them to be part of society, they just refuse to do that. And therefore we're not really solving the problem. But, that's important, but the military. The army in Israel is mandatory. Most of the Jewish population will go to serve in the army, and the army is the real melting pot of our society. I mean, the chance that an Ethiopian boy is going to meet a boy from Russia in high school, elementary school, are very slim. The first place that everybody meets is in boot camp. And unlike in the US of A, everybody goes to boot camp. You don't go to West Point. Everybody goes to boot camp. So we all have the same training, and during boot camp, your commanding officer is supposed to select the finest soldiers, send them out to sergeant school, and then to officer school. Everybody has a chance. So many of these kids that were not that successful, so to speak, in the neighborhood, in high school, for example, they have a blank card. Go to the army. Nobody cares about who you are. You need to distinguish yourself as a soldier, and if you do, it's a whole new chapter in your life. So the army gives a chance to people that were secluded in a certain society. They don't really know the rest of the country. So the chances to succeed are not that big. The army gives them a chance. So the army has a value, which is more social sometimes than military. It is indeed a place to blend everybody in. And that's what people basically meet together. That's what makes the Israeli society. So the parents that came from other countries will never be integrated to the same level as the kids, which is obvious in most societies. But in Israel, it's not just let's play basketball in the neighborhood. We all go to boot camp. And that's where the Jew from Russia meets the one from Ethiopia, and the Jew from Morocco meets the Jew from Poland, etc. So the army plays a very important part in really creating a melting pot that produces the Israeli society. Please.
All right, can you hear me? I've got a question. I just like your last point because I'm an Army brat. And since I'm an Army brat, we lived in Germany. And when we lived in Germany, my mother and father had the foresight to take me to Dachau. So we visited Dachau. And the only reason why I'm a trooper right now is because when we went to Dachau, I saw the pain and I wanted to be on the right side from then on. So could you
more, how can I give you more insight? It's no, you know, when it comes to the to a personal level, I mean, of everybody in the country, not all the Jews in Israel came from Europe. So many people in the country were basically not part of the Second World War Holocaust. Jews that come from North Africa, Morocco, Egypt, Libya, Tunisia was conquered by the Germans as well, come from Iraq and come from Asian countries. The Holocaust is part of what they study in schools, or maybe their spouse, all right, was married too, and that's how they are engaged. But now for the second generation, we need to educate the kids. In my case, it was something that we grew up with because our parents were Holocaust survivors, so we had it as part of our family story. Now we need to teach it to the kids, and you know, time will tell if they're going to be as committed as I believe we are. Part of it is Israel sends, every high school in Israel sends a team once a year to go to Poland, and they go to places like Auschwitz, and they go to places like Treblinka, and it's simply to teach them about what they will never understand. And they don't have parents to tell them the story because the parents are not part of that experience, so we send them over to experience that firsthand. And there was a lot of criticism. Some people think that this is a mistake and the kids should not be exposed to such a level to the Holocaust. I think it's not a bad idea. But when you think about the Polish people, they have kids from Israel coming to Poland, and these kids are educated that the Polacks were also, so the Polish people were actually collaborating with Nazi Germany, which is half true and half incorrect, okay? So it creates a tension between the countries now, Israel and Poland. Because we are sending kids over there to study about the Holocaust, and part of the education is that many of the Polish people collaborate with the Nazis. So the Polish do not agree that it will be the way that these kids are being guided when they go to see the death camps. So that's another issue between the states now, all right? And Poland is a very militant state recently, very militant, to such an extent that the EU wanted to expel them because they violate many principles of democracy, including you cannot speak against Poland in Poland. Well, that's a dictatorship. You cannot criticize the Polish people during the Second World War, and if you do, you go to jail without even a trial. It's a law that democracy is not supposed to make, right? So again, it's our effort to try to educate the kids by sending them over there to see with their very eyes. When the locals are now hesitate because we accuse them as being collaborators with the Germans, which they were, by the way. Not all of them, but at least some of them. So again, I'm not sure that I can relate to your question about elaborating on that. I can tell you from my experience, that's one of my motivations in life. When we say never again, we mean that. Never again.
Okay.
we talk about Jesus a lot, especially in the church, and it's something that we talk about bringing up in our workplace with our friends, things like that. Is that something that happens in Israel and Jerusalem? Do people believe in Jesus?
There is a group in the country which is called Messianic Jews. Well, we have Christians in Israel as well. The Arab population, a couple of hundreds of thousands of Christians, obviously, so that's part of their lives. Among the Jewish population, we have a group called Messianic Jews. I cannot tell you the numbers because we don't really have numbers, but they do have the congregations. Officially, Israel recognizes 4 religions, which means if you carry Israeli documents that include religion, you can either be Jewish, Christian, Muslim, or Druze. You cannot be Buddhist or Messianic Jewish. But since we're a democracy, you can practice anything you want. But you will not be officially recognized because in Israel, rabbis, for example, are state officials. They are paid by the state, all right? And qadis and priests as well are paid by the state. A Messianic rabbi will not be paid by the state because Israel doesn't recognize officially Messianic Judaism. So people like myself, Jews, again, since I'm engaged with Christian evangelicals all the time, of course, I know the Bible, the New Testament, it's part of my daily bread, okay, to use a Christian term. Most people in Israel, it's just not part of their daily schedule. So, but I have to say that, let's say 20, 30 years ago, most people were not even interested. You need to understand that, again, my generation, I only can speak about my generation. We grew up, and that was the official policy in Israel, that the whole world is an enemy. We cannot trust anybody. We should only rely on ourselves, including the Christian world. Because the battle cry of the German Wehrmacht, under which 6 million Jews perished, was God is with us. All right? And when the Jewish people think about, okay, who is this God that the Germans were so happy to mention his name by slaughtering us? The answer was Christians. So it was not part of our education. Today, about 15 years ago, my kids come back from school, my daughter was asking me, Daddy, did you hear the name Jesus? I said, of course I did. What did you hear the name? She said, well, they taught us in school. I said, well, hallelujah, it's about time to understand that we are not alone. So today, there is a bigger understanding in Israel that the best friends that we have in America are not the American Jews, I'm ashamed to say, but the evangelical Christians. All right, so this is a new kind of comprehension. Usually it's ignorance, and sometimes you start educating the people so they are familiar. If you approach somebody in the pub in Tel Aviv and ask him, did you hear about Jesus? He will be willing to engage in a conversation, which 20 years ago was unheard of. All right, so today there was more openness to listen, okay, so which is a good sign, at least to start a dialogue. But I'm telling you, my generation, the Christian world was an enemy, not a friend. We did not distinguish Catholics from Greek Orthodox evangelicals. 50 years ago, there was no such distinction. The Christian world was not a friend. The memory of the Holocaust was still too fresh. So today, after 2 generations passed, people are more willing to listen and maybe to build some bridges and dialogue between the Christian world and the Jewish world. Okay.
Ronny, never again, right? I wonder how your generation, when this uptick there is in anti-Semitism in the world today, more than an uptick, when people from your generation get together and you hear those accounts, what do you say to one another? How do you process that? What do you do with that when you see that rising as you do?
Well, my conclusion is very sad that we are not learning, and it's going to happen again and again and again. Nobody cares about the facts anymore, because I can easily confront anybody that brings up those arguments, because usually it's based on simple ignorance. And then it's very easy for me to confront those but nobody cares about the truth anymore. I mean, you hear those statements. I spoke in a place, I can't remember, said, oh, your country is racist, and said, just a minute, sir. Give me an example. Everybody knows. No. When you say everybody knows, nobody knows anything. Give me an example. And of course, there was no example. So when I go to places and speak about, not about the virtual tour, but about Israel, Palestine, etc., I tell people, listen, we have to establish 2 rules. Number 1, when there's a time for Q&A, you cannot say something, your facts are incorrect, unless you can tell people what is correct and how they can confirm it. If you cannot do that, don't challenge the facts. That diffuses quite a lot of sometimes the unpleasantness in such a debate. So again, when I came to the conclusion that most people are just speaking slogans, they don't have a clue about what they're talking about. And once you say, well, just give me an example, everybody knows that, no, nobody knows anything. Just give me an example and I can answer. You never got to this level of somebody bringing a reasonable argument, because you can bring some good arguments and we can have a debate and maybe you're right and I'm wrong. It's possible. But when somebody says everybody knows that, that means he doesn't have a clue or she doesn't have a clue. All right? So it makes my job easier. The problem is that people are not always receptive to hear. You start an argument, and before you're developing a sentence, you're a bigot and you're a racist and you're... We're in the Western world here, right? Aren't we committed to open dialogue and to try to convince one another? I spoke in a church once. I just have to share that with you. And I was part of a conference, and the speaker before me was an Israeli retired general or something. And he said something in the church, and he said, yeah, David, you know that David was a myth, didn't ever exist, etc. It just went on. Now it's my turn. I said, listen, I had the whole message, but I'm going to decline. And I went outside to read the sign. It says the church off. I mean, you people hate Israel so much that somebody in your church was questioning the Bible and you did not stop him right away. You get to that level as well. So it depends on how deep you hate Israel and how you compromise your principles. And I can understand some of the sentiment, but I'm afraid it's all based on ignorance. People don't know, people don't care. And they know exactly what they think, and that's it. So what's the point? Sometimes you can be, what's the point? If nobody's willing to listen. Happens. Yes, ma'am.
Here we have Social Security when we retire. Does Israel take care of their elderly?
Yeah, Social Security when you retire. Yeah, we do have it as well. It depends how you calculate that to your pension when you're working. As always, they take from your paycheck. There was a certain rating of age of how much you were making, because from the age of 60, you can start collecting money, but if you start at 60, then you get less later on. So they give you all kind of options. Is it generous? Is it good? Well, I have to tell you that now with COVID, right, when people lost their jobs, Social Security was supposed to compensate people, and they did for a while. People got about 70% of what they were making, if they can prove that with invoices and paychecks, etc., for about a year or so. But then again, the treasury was totally drained, so stop doing that. I think that the system is fair. And we don't have people who are homeless in Israel. We don't have people who are hungry in Israel. So with all the challenges that we are facing, and Israel spends more than 27% of our budget on security, one of the highest in the world, we understand the pressure, we understand that we are limited in resources. So, yeah, I think that, you can always do better. But yes, Social Security is the minimum that people get. Age of 62 for women, 67 for men. 2 years to go.
I'm just wondering how much income comes into Israel through tourism, and did COVID really take a hit if you have a lot of income coming in with tourism?
Well, tourism was one of the biggest industries in the country. About 24 billion shekels is about $9 billion a year. For a small economy, that's a lot of money. Tourism was the first one to take a real hit and the last one to recover. Okay, because in March 15th of 2020, I saw the back of the last tourist going through the sign that says departures, and the closure started an hour later at midnight, all right? Never opened since. So yeah, the tourist industry, we have about 200,000 people which are engaged directly or indirectly in the tourist industry. And yeah, 200,000 people, that's about 1 million people. Their families, obviously, their income is really low. So there are no groups come to the country. So the hotels are not working. Museums, national parks, bus drivers, tour guides, and everybody who is connected to tourism is basically unemployed now for a while. And recovery will take time. Because if a hotel has a staff of 500 people, for example, and you simply fire them, some of them find new jobs. If you want to recruit now people to train them to work in a hotel, that takes some time. And if you open before you have the right staff, you provide bad service. And that's bad to the whole industry. So how they're going to do that, I don't know. Hotels were very well compensated. So were the travel agencies. Travel agencies were very well compensated. Not the drivers and other guys and not some of the others. We have a small union, not very strong. And we are too nice and polite. We don't know how to be aggressive as a tour guide association. But yeah, so tourism, we had, the peak year was 12-19. We had about 4 million people, which is not that much. Think about the potential of what we can have in Israel. But again, the infrastructure is adequate, the hotels are nice, the buses are new, and again, the system is working. Let's recover first and then think about the next step. The next step will be Calvary Chapel, Lebanon, coming over to Israel.
How do your schools exactly work, like for the children and stuff?
How schools exactly work? Well, for the last 2 years, they Zoomed. That's how they work. The system in Israel is divided to 4 kind of systems. We have the general system, we have the Arab system, we have the ultra-Orthodox system, and we have the Orthodox, ultra and Orthodox. You cannot expect the Arab kids to study Bible, so they don't study Bible. You cannot accept the Arab kids to study Jewish history, so they don't study Jewish history. They study Quran, and they study Arab history, whatever that is. I'm not being kind of sarcastic. Everything is monitored by the Board of Education. You go to kindergarten from the age of 3, and you start in the ultra-Orthodox world, you start reading and writing in the age of 3. So these guys take it very seriously when it comes to education. You go to elementary school, and then you go to junior high, and you go to high school. In the age of 18, you graduate, you go to serve your country, and when you've done that, you can choose to go to a college or to university. Universities are less expensive because it's subsidized by the state. Colleges are much more expensive. And the diploma that you're getting is equal, the same kind of a diploma. And many university teachers prefer to teach in colleges because they're paid more than they're paid in university. I would say Israel has the highest rates per capita in the world of university graduates, whatever that means. I never understood fully what it means, but it's just telling you some statistics, all right? So that's how the system works. No homeschooling in the country. They just started now with homeschooling, and again, COVID was really almost a necessity. You had to develop some kind of homeschooling system, but it started before COVID, and somebody went to the Supreme Court and argued that he has the right to provide the best education possible to his children. And he won his case. So the state said, if you're not happy with the elementary schools that we're providing, or the system we're providing, go and get your own education. So that started a real new movement of homeschooling in the country. Again, everything is monitored by the state somehow. I'm not familiar with the detail because my kids are no longer go to school. But I do know that there is now a possibility to teach and to homeschool kids under some restrictions. Again, COVID basically messed up everything. But at least it was an ongoing process that was started a few years ago. And the last one. I'm sorry.
Hey, let's thank Ronny for a wonderful time together.
Thank you.
And in case you're here for the first time this evening and did not hear this, we're doing this by love gift. So there's a box in the back, and if you'd like to give a gift to Ronny, you can make the check out to Calvary Chapel, and then we're going to issue a check to him from that. So let's just close in a prayer. Can we do that? And this man's been... There we go. Father, we thank you for Ronny. We thank you for the way that you use him to give people a better photograph of what they're reading in their Bible, and for the richness that that has brought to so many thousands of people. We pray, Lord, you'd bless him, give him safe travels home, And Lord, with all this chaos from COVID, Father, just pray you start to bring back some semblance of normalcy to his life. Lord, bless him in all that he does. And we pray this in Christ's name, and all of God's people said, Amen. Thank you, Ronnie.
Thank you.